Welcome to Equine-Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times best-selling author of The Horse Boy, founder of New Trails Learning Systems and LongRideHome.com. You can find details of all our programs and shows on rupertisaacson.com. Here on Equine-Assisted World, we look at the cutting edge and the best practices currently being developed and established in the equine-assisted field. This can be psychological, this can be psych, this can be physical, this can be all of the conditions that human beings have that these lovely equines, these beautiful horses that we work with, help us with. Thank you for being part of the adventure, and we hope you enjoy today's show. Welcome back to Equine-Assisted World. We're going to Norway today. Amazing place. Amazing person up there, Norunn Kogstad. She is a psychotherapist who runs an amazing, I keep saying that word, don't I? Because it's true, place called Lundehagen, halfway up Norway, where horse welfare, human welfare, psychotherapy, equine psychotherapy, the different worlds of equine therapy all come together in a really unique nexus that I think is uniquely Nordic, uniquely Scandinavian in a way, in the breadth of vision. I think many of us further down in towards the equator, which compared to Norway we are, tend to get a bit mired in our local view. And I think there's people up at the top of the world, the Scandinavians, the Canadians, they often seem to have this sort of slightly broader view. It's like they're looking down on us and sort of going, oh, look at those interesting funny people down there all squabbling about things. And they seem to provide us with an interesting example of functional society. I think we know this is true in education. We know this is true in healthcare. We know this is true in just sort of the public and private sector in general, compared to further down in Europe, North America, etc. So I've always been a bit intrigued by this. Like, why are the systems up there so functional? And Norunn is a very good example of a functional system. So I thought we'd get her on here to explain that, but also what is psychotherapy and what is equine psychotherapy? And what even is it as a field and why is it important? And how does it relate to what the rest of us are all doing in this great conversation that we're having about horses and humans and healing? So Norunn, thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, first of all, Rupert, thank you so much for inviting me onto this podcast. Well, I am Norunn. I'm a psychiatrist and psychotherapist. And as you said, I run Lundehagen. I've been including horses into psychotherapy for the last 10 to 15 years, more or less. And I sort of been, a lifelong horsewoman. I've always been drawn to horses, wherever I were in the world. I was always drawn to horses. And when I heard that it's possible to include horses into psychotherapy, I found that very intriguing. So I went ahead and I got to know this hospital in Norway where they offer specialized care, especially for people who has experienced overwhelming experiences like traumatic events. And they include horses. And I got to know the head psychologist of that department, and she told me that, well, Norunn, if you want to do this work, you have to go to the US and do a HEAL education, and then you have to become a centered riding instructor and get yourself a proper psychotherapy education. Good luck. And so I did.
Quickly, what is HEAL? HEAL. Why did she tell you to go do that?
Well, HEAL stands for Human Equine Alliances for Psychotherapy and Learning. And it's a model developed by Lee Shambu. She also worked together with Linda Kohanov and some other people in the beginning of the founding of HEAL. And HEAL is emotion-focused, body-oriented psychotherapeutic intervention, including horses, for trauma populations. This was back in 2013 when I did that education in the US. And at that time, there was this wave of trauma-informed care asking the questions of what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. And the emerging field of neuroscience was just opening up to the wide public. And it was fantastic for me to come into that field through the HEAL model. Norway does have its, functional competence of not being overly enthusiastic about new things. So I wouldn't say that, the new knowledge and the new way of looking at relationship and trauma is very well integrated into the system as of yet, but especially not, 10 to 15 years ago. So for me, that was really super exciting, and just, dive into all of these fantastic new ways of looking at people and the body-oriented perspective from Bessel van der Kolk and Pat Ogden and The Body Keeps the Score, and how that was opening up to so many perspectives, both on my own personal journey and on how to work with clients and how to open up for the interaction with the horses as well.
You say that Norway isn't so keen on new stuff and functional in that way. However, in the paragraph more or less before that, you said that you had gone to work and learn at a hospital which offers equine stuff. Now, if you're listening to that as a Brit or as an American, you think hospitals with horses and farms, that's not something you really hear. So that's an example of what I mean, of perhaps in your perception, things move slowly for new stuff up in Norway. But from our point of view, looking up at, say, that healthcare system, that's not something you'd see at all. In the UK, in the US, probably you might see it in a private thing here and there, but you certainly wouldn't see it as a sort of state-funded, state-sponsored thing. Can you just backtrack a little bit? Why would you find horses, farms, nature in hospitals in Norway? Like, what's the history of that, and what's their logic with that?
Well, the history, I think, is quite common for both the, continental countries and the American countries, that, there was this huge movement of moving the people back into nature and farming and agriculture, and you have the therapeutic society.
When was this? I don't think it's within living memory.
No. That's, 100 years ago. And then you have development of the more therapeutic society in the mid-50s, maybe, where you had the integration of, the staff and the patients living together on the treatment facility, working together, creating stuff together. Fantastic ideas, but also some problems of, people enacting each other's problems, difficulties keeping a professional framework, and so on. But I think in Norway, there has been a long-standing tradition for keeping mental health or mental treatment institutions in a agricultural setting. So all the major old institutions for mental treatment are actually old farms. And Norway has been governed in a sort of conservative way for many years, where there has been a strong focus on science and academic and development of treatment modalities that would sort of help populations and help people. So, but the beginning of the 2000, 2002, 2003, there were 3 hospitals in Norway incorporating equine-assisted psychotherapy in their treatment. And this was not based on people liking horses, but this was based on specialist healthcare that found that this population is really hard to reach. How can we sort of, what can we do to help them? And I know that there are several places in Europe who started like that in the beginning of the 2000s, but the specialists have now less access to developing and utilize treatment modalities that they find useful because it costs money. And now the healthcare system of Norway, as many other places, is much more directed towards, the economy of running healthcare.
Is it getting privatized?
Not yet, but parts of it is getting privatized, but they're trying to run the public healthcare system as a private system. So it's a very complicated, very illogical system right now.
So, okay, so that's where you sort of fill in the gap, I guess. You're running Lundehagen. I've been there. It's an extraordinary place. I try not to keep saying amazing. What I mean by extraordinary is that what I've noticed when you go there is you can look at, obviously, psychotherapy, which is human welfare. Your standard of horse welfare is exceptionally high, and I want to go into that and why in a little bit. You're doing research. There's, PhD in the offing. You guys are scientists. Obviously, there's clinical work happening as well. There's consultations going on. You're a nexus. You run these events where different people from different modalities can come and present what they do and add to the conversation of equine-assisted work. It's unusually open-minded rather than saying, okay, we do this model or we do that model. It's like, no, we're open to all the models. And that, as you know, that's not terribly usual in the horse world, let alone the equine-assisted world, although hopefully it's changing. So you are, funnily enough, privately filling the public sector gap a little bit there. But you're predicated on psychotherapy and equine-assisted psychotherapy. So here's the big question, I think, and I know I would be thinking of this if I was driving, listening to this podcast. What the hell is psychotherapy anyway? Like, what is it? It's a word that people use. Like, what the fuck is it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the theorist Bruce Wampold, he's done a lot of statistical research on therapy outcome, and he has compiled the model of the common factors and a conceptual model. And there is a huge debate in the psychotherapy research field as to common factor versus specific factors. But I think what Bruce Wampold says is that psychotherapy is an intervention that aims at alleviating pain and create psychological changes, and it's based on psychological theories delivered by a trained therapist. So I think sort of that way of thinking is what I would say maybe is most understandable.
We talked about hospitals. You're also, and I forgot to say this in your bio, you're also a medical doctor, and so is your husband. Do you have to be a medical doctor in order to be a psychotherapist in the same way that you do to be a psychiatrist, or not?
No, not at all. And there is a lot of, misunderstandings about those terms. So psychotherapy, that's a separate education. In Norway, only psychiatrists and psychologists can become certified psychotherapists, but there's a lot of different kind of psychotherapy trainings, in brackets, where people learn something about something, but you're not publicly certified as a psychotherapist. But very few psychologists and psychiatrists at this stage are psychotherapists.
Why?
Because psychotherapy education is a long education. It requires a lot. It's very costly, it's demanding, it's tiresome. You even have to have your own therapy. And public funds are very scarcely available. And the public system does not anymore see the value of psychotherapy when offering therapy.
I suppose, playing devil's advocate, if you'd gone to medical school as you did and you went through all those years and then you became, say, a psychiatrist, then you got to add all this other training. I could see how that might not be so attractive. Quick question. Are you also a psychiatrist? Or
Yes.
you are?
Yeah.
So you're a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist?
Yes.
You're scary. Okay. So
No.
you can section me, but I guess you can also give me drugs. Do you think that that's important? Like, for you to see the work flourish, and I want to talk about what it is and how it works. And you mentioned some jargony sounding words about factors and common factors, which I have no idea what those are. So I'm going to need you to explain those. But do you think that your medical background makes what do you think it brings that's special? But equally, if someone didn't have that medical background, would they be just as good? Like, just can you riff on that for a minute? Because I think some of us might think, oh, well, I'm interested in that, but I'm not going to go to medical school, and I'm certainly not going to be a psychiatrist. And then, so talk to us about what it's brought for you, but also about accessibility, I guess.
Well, I'm in the States, there are 6 different professions that are able to be certified psychotherapists, but with a psychotherapy training. And for my part, I think that, to have the medical profession as a background is useful, and it gives it an academic and clinical standards to what I do. There is, research about the therapist where you can see that therapists that have high sort of not confidence, but trust or reliability and low professional self-consciousness are the best therapists. And I do think that, having a profound education does offer, a support for you to be able to actually accept your own both faults and knowledges, and accept that you have to make decisions and you have to sort of be responsible for what you're doing. And it also opens up for the humility and to be humble, to understand that the world is not black and white. On yourself, nobody, and to be a part of somebody else's journey without coming in there with clear answers, and knowing that the world is hard and it is difficult and it is unfair, and still having a framework for understanding and a framework for, allowing for the difficulties and the injustice to open up.
So basically what you're saying is you've got to be an individual who understands the nature of ambiguity. And
Yes. Yeah. And I think that all of this can be acquired through whatever personality and life and so, but I do think that having a proper education will help you on the way.
I've just been, while you've been talking, I've been scanning history of psychotherapy, because I wanted to see if I was right. It's like, is it Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung thing? Like, okay, yes, it seems to be. But then it goes, we went back to some more ancient things. Guess who pops up as one of the fathers of ancient psychotherapy, at least on this website that I've been looking at, called
Cool. No. Cool.
A man called Xenophon.
Oh.
And so Xenophon, as you well know, as many people listening will know, is often considered to be the father of dressage. He's actually not, and he never said he was. But he was writing in 400 BC, more or less. And he does, in fact, what is true is he does write the first European book on dressing the horse. But he himself admits in that book that he learned the whole thing in Persia, and that there are indeed previous Persian writers on the subject. But Xenophon, as we know, was also a student of Socrates, friend of Plato, and is regarded as the father of Stoic philosophy. So it's interesting that you are effectively with talk therapy, right? Coming from perhaps ancient roots of a horseman. And it'd be interesting to see how many of the other people involved in the development of psychotherapy might have been. I don't know if Carl Jung was involved in horses, for example. He might have been. But talk therapy. You don't talk to horses. Well, you do, but you know what I mean. The horses doesn't. I guess we've all seen that meme of the horse sitting on the couch to the psychotherapist or psychiatrist saying, circles, circles. All she wants is circles. I keep giving her circles. What does she want? How does talk therapy, human talk therapy, and horses, what's the connection there? Because you've got a non-verbal creature and the storytelling speaking ape. There seemed to be a bit of a dichotomy there. So can you explain?
You sort of, mentioned a little bit of the history and the talk therapy. And can we go back to that for just 1 second, and then we jump into the horses in the therapy again, okay?
Please.
Because I think it's really cool to understand some of the extremely confusing stuff that happens through history. Because originally, the theologists and the philosophers were the ones talking to people,
Yeah.
So talking to people that were sick was not considered therapy or anything close to medical profession. And then you had the psychologist that in the early 18th century started investigating human behavior, actually uninterested in psychological processes. They were considering only behavioral. How does people work? How do people work? What are they? And then came the area of Freud,
Like you could say that's a Freudian.
where people started getting interested in people's history. And that was a dramatic change in the medical field, because in medical field that had never been considered relevant almost before the era of Freud. And he's sort of starting to explore the human psyche. What is the human psyche, as opposed to the psychologists who were only interested in behavior and testing and functions,
Yeah.
And then sort of the medical doctors, the neurologists, as Freud was a neurologist, sort of imposed on the theologists topics where they were talking to people.
Right.
And then
you talk to your priest. Yeah.
Yeah. The psychologists are now the one associated with the talk therapy. What happened when Freud started looking into the human psychology? What is the human psyche? How does it function? What happened to people? How do they talk about it? What are people? People are interesting and they seem to be quite complex. We try to talk about trees as being complex, but it seems like people are actually even more complex. And Freud's attribution or contribution to the science was just astonishing, so extremely interesting. I've never read about any scientist able to propose theories like he did, and then really getting into it, exploring it. And if it did not fit exactly, then he would just reject the whole theory and start over again. A fantastic capability of renewing himself totally every second year. And he was, of course, he had all kind of stuff and ideas and things, but reading his life is just amazing as a interesting person, scientist, and quite intelligent when it comes to understanding the human mind. What psychoanalysis offered was a theory about personality development. So theory about how we develop our psychology, and also a theory about how the development of the psychology of a person can go wrong. So a theory of the pathology of personality development, and then a theory of treatment. It must be said that psychoanalysis, the talking cure, as the new modality for therapy, Freud was not the greatest advocate of the talking cure. And he also even said that, well, he might not be the best candidate for being a talking cure therapist because of his temper and so. But it's a very interesting beginning for the understanding of the human psychology. What Freud discovered was that the free associations, the way people talk about things, the associations they have, the metaphors, the symbols they use, the dreams they come with, how they are sort of wired together, seemed to be what was important in understanding the person in front of you. Not the words, not the stories, sort of, but the latent content of what was being conveyed. And he early on considered that the counter-transference, so the therapist emotional and practical reaction and experience of the patient, was not relevant, because he said that the therapist should be like a blank screen. That was, of course, a very huge mistake. And he also rejected that.
They're emotional creatures, yeah.
Yeah, but he also rejected that. And he also had, the transference seemed to be the major part of what's going on in a therapy room. And the transference and the counter-transference is sort of
what is transference and what is counter-transference?
So transference is when I meet you, Rupert, and I start talking to you, then I will bring in all of my pictures of, my life from before. And if I've met somebody who has the same, way of acting in many ways that you have, I will easily impose my previous,
Right.
experience into that. But also, if I'm used to meeting wonderful men and they are really, really abusing me, then I will interact with you as a little bit how I've learned to interact with men like that, So that will be my transference. But your counter transference will be your reaction to me back,
Makes
which
sense.
will include all of my transference stuff going on. Maybe you will meet me and we talk a little bit and you feel really like, oh my God, something's going on here, but I can't say it from the words, it just feels like there's something really difficult in talking to this person. We all experience that, when we talk to a person, all of a sudden we feel like, oh my God, I'm so guilty of something went wrong with you. Was that my fault or what happened in this room? That's the countertransference going on. And the countertransference has, of course, developed into what we called, or it's a huge part of what we call the relational psychotherapy. So when we are together, then what's going on inside of me when I'm together with you? That's the important part of the relational psychotherapy. And that has been a major, major contribution when it comes to the attachment research developing with Bowlby and his gang in the 70s, where they talk about the early interaction and how that will influence our lives and how we interact with the rest of the world. So when we talk about...
Quickly, I know this is really hard. Explain attachment.
So attachment, you can explain it from very many perspectives, but maybe I'll try to explain it from a simple neuroemotional perspective. So Panksepp is a neuroscientist and he proposes sort of this model of the primary emotional circuit. So we have 7 primary emotions, and Panksepp's models, there's a lot of different models of emotions, but Panksepp's models are now widely accepted and very useful. And I think they're very, very useful clinically as well. And he proposes fear, aggression, anxiety, care, seeking, and as the main emotional circuit. So in the panic circuit, what he proposes is that when a young baby of a mammal gives out the cry, like we all heard babies or dogs or puppies or kittens or whatever who gives out this cry, and then the mother will react immediately. And it's this instinctive response, like, oh my God, there's this instinct response to that kind of infant cry. And well, what Panksepp sees is that when the anxiety in the infant is activated and this primal cry comes out, then there will be a correspondent activation in the care person or care individual. So that sort of the circuit of anxiety and the sort of circuit of care will fit together and belongs together. And that's the neuroemotional way of understanding this attachment, that we are linked together.
The mammalian caregiving system, basically.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And the attachment research showed that the interaction with early caregivers will give the print on how you will operate in the world. And they have 4 different types of attachment models based on which circumstances you grow up in. And the understanding of this relational dynamics with the early caregivers from first second of living.
Yeah. I mean, I think a useful piece of mentorship that I got, which I think helps understand this, was from spending so much time with the Bushman, Khoisan Bushman, in the Kalahari, and watching how complete and unconditional love, and including the kids in every single thing that was going on, because they're on your back, so they watch you track, they listen to the conversations, they see you engaging in every activity, and then little by little but also they're being cared for all the time, because you would never let your kid cry it out in another room, because as soon as the kid cries, the hyenas go, ooh, lunch. And you would never put your kid away from you, even in the hut, because the hyenas will come into your hut at night. They'll find a way in, and they will absolutely take your kid. And you'll never hear them. They'll be, so you would never dream of putting your kid over there. You would put it between 2 adults to keep it warm and to protect it, and so on and so on. and that this is just how human life has evolved. And so a baby, if it cries and cries it out, is thinking on some fundamental level, oh shit, the hyenas are going to come get me. Oh, nobody cares. And many of us have wondered how much of our quote unquote stuff goes back to that primal experience of just having been made to cry it out as babies, because most people from certainly my generation. Okay, so let's say in that case, I perhaps have insecure attachment, right? Would that be correct to say? Because I would then look for other things to fill the hole of not feeling attached enough. And I've done that in many ways in my life. So I've done thorough research. I like to think I put the fun back in dysfunction. So then let's say I am not securely attached, and I then end up develop some pathologies. And I end up in front of you with my pathology. And perhaps I'm addicted, perhaps I'm whatever, and I've got something going on, and it's now impacting my life and it's impacting the lives of others around me. I'm in front of you, and you're a psychotherapist, and this is about talk, and you're going to now pair me up with horses. Why? And what's the benefit?
Well, first of all, when we talk about the attachment styles, and we have the safe attachment and the ambivalent attachment and the avoidant insecure attachment, and then the last type, which is the complete disorganized attachment, then I
think I have all of those, right?
Yeah, but what I think is really important here is that these are theories. These are not clinically, these are not psychotherapies, These are theories for therapists to sort of make a scaffold in your head.
Like a bit of a framework to work.
Yeah, you need to have sort of a framework understanding of what's going on in front of me, because that can help you to be able to just withstand whatever is going on in the therapy. And I think quite a lot of, what we learn about how it's so important to meet each other, understand each other, listen to each other, it comes with whatever kind of attachment style you have. And whatever kind of issues or problems or emotional reactions, they are valid, So it's not like, oh, you have an ambivalent style, so you're kind of craving stuff that's just because you have an ambivalent. That it's not. Whatever comes up is valid and needs to be responded to and understood properly. And it's the relationship to the therapist, which is the healing part of what's going on if we look at the attachment theory. And I do think that what's really important to understand in that aspect is that what is that relationship, Because when you come to me, then there needs to be some fundamental thing going on between me and you for you to have a relationship with me where you can experience what's important for you, where you can start to explore what's going on inside of you. Because we all suffer, we all feel bad, we all have horrible illnesses. But to alleviate that suffering, to be able to live with yourself and your needs and who you actually are, that's what I think about real psychotherapy. It's not fixing. We can't fix history. History is history, but we have to fix the responses. We have to fix the suffering to the responses that we have in our body. And
okay, that makes perfect sense. Why horses?
Yeah, and when I include people who has experienced a lot of difficult things, and they have a lot of reactions, and they often have immense amount of self-hatred and shame going on. And it takes a lot of time in an office, even though I have a nice office. I've built an office which is not a white office, but it's a cozy. I'm trying to make it, and I don't believe in the neutral therapist. So it's my office, and this is the place, and I want to show you that you are important, and this should be a good place to be,
Yeah, and your dog is there too, which is...
And my dog is there, and she loves my clients, and she develops a very special bond to each client. She's quite undernourished when it comes to care, but she can manage. So, but it takes a lot of time for people who has had a lifetime of self-hatred, trouble, rejections, violence, to come to that space where we can be together and trust each other. And what I think is really needed, I think it's really nice to look into some some of this basic understanding of the human social interaction needs. And by that I can, for example, polyvagal theory, that I think can give a good way of looking at the social engagement system, that we need each other. We need to feel contact. We need to feel seen. We need to feel understood. It's not the absence of threat that determines whether you feel safe or not. It's the presence of connection. These things make sense to me, you know? And when I bring people to the horses, people quite often, we start by just observing the horses, talking about what's going on, what are they doing. And people quite often say very quickly, you know, when I came here, I was stressed. When I leave, I feel relaxed. And very quickly, in that first session, when they start observing the horses, these very profound metaphors, symbols, the way of looking at the world and people comes up when we look at the horses. I just did a study interviewing youths that were included in psychotherapy with horses, and they had some fantastic comments about the first session with the horses. One of them said that, you know, we stood there, looked at the horses. It was really freezing cold. It was really boring. And I felt horrible. I didn't trust anybody. And then by just looking at the horses after some time, it was actually kind of nice, you know? I could stand there with my pain and my emotion and feeling bad in the group. And all of a sudden, it was okay. And this person was quite sure that it would be impossible for him or her to continue in a group session if there were no horses present.
Why? Why did just the presence of the horses make that person feel better?
Yeah, exactly. Why?
Because here's the thing. You can totally understand the dog, right? The dog greets you when you come in. The dog is very human-like in its behavior and its emotional presentation. We know this is why we all have dogs. Yeah. So I can totally see you're feeling like shit. You come to your psychotherapist. They've got a nice dog. The dog greets you. You're going to get, I guess your word would be, transference of emotion positively from that dog unconditionally. They're just happy to see you. Horse doesn't react that way. Now, aesthetically, horses are beautiful. This we know. But beyond that beauty, or is the beauty part of it? What's going on, do you think, before we even get into how we're working with that horse? Why does the mere presence of a horse help in this way, do you think?
Well, I'd love to get into the academics of it, but let's do that afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
What these young people say, it's amazing what they say. They have huge problems. And they say, well, you know, the horse, it's not like a dog. They won't come over and, you know, please you in any way, but they just require you to be who you are. And that's kind of uncommon, one of them said. Isn't that amazing? The horse just requires you to be who you are. I mean, that's really insane.
Well, and what's interesting about that is that that's also a perception, right? Because we actually know, if we work with horses, that horses require us to not be who we are in certain ways. Like if I'm hungry, the horse requires me not to eat it, you know, or to override my hunting instinct. Or if I'm afraid of the horse, it's definitely helpful for me to engage in some kind of masking, so I don't transfer my distress to the horse. And the horse, oh shit, what's going on? Why is this person afraid? Yeah. So what's interesting is that, you know, you hear a lot of people saying horses accept you for who you are. And I don't know if it's true or not true. I think that statement raises as many questions as it does the things. However, I think what is true is it makes people feel that way. And horses seem to make people feel that way. And so that begs, you know, another rather interesting question is why? Why do horses make people feel so accepted? Why do horses make people feel that the horse only requires them to be who they are.
Mm.
What do you think causes somebody to interpret that? And it's a positive thing, but whether it's accurate or not, if it's healing, hey, we're going to go with it. But why? Why do you think they come to this conclusion?
Yeah, I'm really, really, really intrigued by that as well. And I try to look at it from, the perspective of their experience, how they describe the interaction. Most of them immediately say something about one of the horses being similar to them or special to them, or something goes on in them relationally towards one horse. So there seemed to be some sort of immediate, attraction towards the horses in a way.
Almost metaphorical, allegorical, immediately.
Yeah.
But why? What's going on in the human psyche with that?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I mean, from an academic side, what I'm thinking, and that what we are looking into from the videos that we're doing, is that, this ability of the horse to notice and be aware of so many things in its surroundings at once seems to be magic for people. So when
Does a dog not do that too? Is a dog
No,
not?
it doesn't seem like that. It seems like horses are able to respond and notice more things in the surrounding without physically and acting towards it. So it seems like what my theory, I don't know. Well, my theory is that when people come in with some sort of physical sensation and they're being responded to without being overwhelmed with, huggings and lickings or barking or whatever, but just small, like now. When I said that, you started nodding your head. It's a very small thing, but I felt seen and understood. Sort of, it feels comfortable. It feels like you're listening to me. It feels like you understand what I'm talking about. It feels really good. If you would sort of just think about something else, chewing some food, going away from the picture, I would feel like, am I, getting through here? And this feeling of these micro things that you're doing right now, the way you blinked right now, it was like you were like, yeah, it feels like you're conveying a lot of messages that my body immediately responds to, even through the screen. I think that's quite much more potent and powerful when we're in the same room. But even through the screen, I can feel this sort of understanding and connection and interest, And that does something to me. I think it does more to my physiology when we're in the same room, but still through the screen. It does quite a lot of things to me. Like when we're done research on physiology or the physiology behind regulation, and you look at infants, as we know something about that, when babies have not been touched or cared for, they will die before they're the age of 4. But we also know that, when twins are born, their regulation of heart rate, blood pressure, hormones, and so it's more or less 100%
Related to?
Dependent on.
Okay.
Yeah, another living being, the twin. And infants are very highly dependent on the physiologically regulation of another living being.
Indeed.
And so we continue when we grow up. We tend to think that we're grown up, so we don't need this physical regulation. But we do.
Of course we do.
We do. And I think our blood pressure, our hormone levels, our circadian rhythm, I think that's up to 50% regulation by physiological interaction with caring others.
Yeah, we're social mammals.
Yeah. Do you know that they figured out that men that kisses their wives more than 6 seconds when they leave every morning, they live like 4 years longer?
Really?
So go kissing, Love each other.
Liana. Sorry.
It's the best idea ever. And I think that there's something about...
But the kiss has to last for 6 seconds.
Yes.
So we're not talking pecks here.
No. It has to be 6 seconds in one batch.
Yeah, making a note. Yeah, 6.
Yes. It's important. Do long kisses.
Okay. Right, I might go do some research. I'll speak to you when I'm 90 or 90.
Yeah. So there's
Okay.
something about this physiological regulation that goes on between human and horses, I think,
I see.
which seems to be of importance.
Right, and again, you can understand this in close quarters once you get within the warmth, and you might have listened to the podcast I did with Kansas Caradine, talking about heart math, and Linda Tellington Jones talking about heart math and so on, and the electromagnetic resonance of hearts, and our hearts come into that electromagnetic field of this very powerful heart from the horse, and boom, we co-regulate and get coherence in our own physiology. This is now well studied. I only discovered back in 1993, there was a study at the University of Kassel here in Germany, where I live, which for some reason got completely under the radar, but Kansas Caradine turned me onto it, where they were measuring photons being emitted from hearts when they're thinking about love. And she sent me a meme about this and how far it goes. And so I was saying, oh yes, gosh, if you had a horse one and you got that kind of co-regulation, wow, you'd be a big amplifier. But I thought, is that real? That sounds a bit new agey. So I went and searched for it. I found the study. I'll send it to you. It's that.
Send it to me.
And what's so weird is that's 35 years ago, and we don't know about it. But I can get that. And obviously you'd have to get over your fear of horses or the unfamiliarity, and is the horse going to hurt me? And But let's say you've gotten over all that. The horse is next to you and you're maybe even hugging on, and you're co-regulating, blah, blah, blah. That I can get. But when the horse is on the other end of the arena, when the horse is just standing there in the field, it seems to have a no less powerful effect, even at a distance. That is interesting to me. What do you think about that?
Well, it's not that difficult to understand, really. If you get into a room of, people you don't know, and everybody look really angry, and then, at the far end of that room, one person turns towards you, smile, and says, "Hi, Rupert, I'm going to help you. I'm here." What does that do to your
Well,
physiology?
sure, but a horse doesn't do that. A horse is just the
Well,
horse.
maybe the horse actually does that
Sure.
with the miniature signals.
Mhm.
When I have people who are doing the horse in therapy courses, I put them out into the field to the horses, and I ask them to focus on one horse on a distance and just notice whatever that horse is doing on a distance.
Mhm.
And they can be, 100, 200 meters away, just making note of what that horse is doing. And when they come back, they are so filled with connection with that one horse. Because what I do hope that we find, and what I observe clinically, but this is not what I've, proven academically as of yet, is that the horse, when somebody is in its, I don't know how far, but they can see quite far and notice quite far, then they will immediately be able to respond to the small signals of that person, just flicker off there, which, physiologically in that person will make a response. I'm being responded to.
Right. Talk. So talk therapy, observation of horses. I mean, you might be talking a bit, but obviously now you're talking about the horse. You've also talked about your office, which is presumably more talking like we're talking now. You're sitting across from each other. So can you describe to me an equine psychotherapy session? I arrive. Do I first come to your office and talk to you there, and then we go and we interact with the horses, and then we come back into your office afterwards and we talk again about what our experience was? Or does it play out differently?
We have a pre-evaluation talk. Everybody who contacts us is invited to come to my office to have, 45-minute talk where we're talking about what we're doing, what they're looking for, expectations. Should this be a fit? Should we go ahead and work together? And then it depends a little bit on the background, but usually I'll offer like 1 or 2 evaluation sessions where if we need to do some diagnostic or if we need to do some formal stuff, we'll do that. And then we will go to the horses. When we do the horse sessions, we meet out at the indoor arena where we have a sitting area. We meet there, we talk about sort of topic of the day, what's going on. And it depends. Some people have sort of a treatment plan Some people are in a long process-oriented therapy where it's more in-depth experience of what's going on in that day, per day, and a longer treatment plan, which is not that concrete. Groups, often we either have open groups or we have closed groups. So the open groups is a more psychoeducative group where we go through specific topics related to that populations. And the closed groups, there's a process group where we start the first day by setting sort of the goals and the thoughts and expectations in the group. And then we go to the horses, the open groups, more psychoeducational teaching groups. We choose the horses. The process groups, the patients choose the horses. We bring the horses to the indoor arena. We let the horses free. And we start observing the horses and allowing them to do whatever they need. And when we have younger clients or more disorganized clients, then we do more structured activities. And we have a shorter period of unstructured observations. We do minor observations where we communicate together like, oh, look, there's movements. Whoa, what's going on over there? Who of these horses would you have been if you were a horse? And then straight to greeting the horse. When people are longer into their therapy, they can spend almost the whole session just observing the horses, having metaphors, thoughts, projections, thinkings, looking how things play out. Requires quite a lot of patience, calmness, stability inside of yourself. And it needs to be experienced as meaningful and interesting and sort of powerful. I know in some trauma centers, they only do observing of horses, but maybe only 5 minutes, and then spend the rest of the week working with sort of ideas, thoughts, projections, fantasies, associations, and so that came up from just that brief observational interaction with horses. And then after the horse session, when we end the session with the horses, then I will sort of say, okay, we are approaching the end of the session for today. Let's bring the horses out. And then usually we have like a very short closing circuit by the end. Anything in particular that came up that, people would like to say about today or something. And then we allow as much as possible to be brought into the next session. And then we bring up the next session, what happened in the last session, if it comes up naturally.
If they're coming to you, is it like they do 12 sessions or they do 25?
In groups are 6 sessions.
Okay.
And individual patients are, different, totally different on what the question is and the requirements.
An average?
What it is.
Is there sort of an average where you sort of see this profound change happen by a certain time, and then the point where you feel or they feel okay, they sort of don't need to come anymore? Or do people definitely?
I have some patients combined office therapy and horse therapy for years, for many, many years, where we have both the severe pathology, but also our continuing, self-development quest. And also some people that comes in for supervision around their relationship and interaction with their horse. But I'd say that the major part of the individual clients I have is from 6 to 12 months.
Okay. And what happens at the end of that 12 months? Do they feel like, hey, I feel better, and you give them a certificate of betterness and off they go? Or how does the process of kind of deciding, I'm okay to move on with the next phase of my life sort of happen?
Well, usually they buy a batch of 10 sessions. And then sort of we make a plan for the 10 sessions, and then we have an evaluation and we talk about where we are in the process. And then we talk about, let's do 10 more sessions and we have an indefinite period of time. Or we talk about, I think maybe one period of 10 sessions could be okay now. That would be good. And then throughout those 10 sessions, we would talk about, this is going to be an ending. How is that affecting you? What does that mean to you? What's going to happen further on? And how is this process working for you?
See, I would imagine that I've been to Lundehagen, obviously, a few times. It's fabulously physically beautiful. You're on this mountain overlooking this lake. Your horses are lovely. And I want to go into your horse welfare and horse care, why they look so good, in a minute. The vibe is just gorgeous. It's this old Scandinavian farm, beautiful old farmhouse. So there must be some sort of grief when people feel they're going to leave the relationship with you, the relationship with the horses, the relationship with the place itself. How do you mitigate that so that they don't then fall into some sort of pathology from the grief of just not being able to hang out at Lundehagen anymore?
Well, I do work quite a lot with patients who has severe symptomatology on different levels. And most of my patients has been in many, many therapy, whatever kind of things before. And they bring along with them major amounts of rejections, disappointments, anger, grief. And we almost always start by working with that quite immediately. And for many patients, the first half year is about how to cope with, because every ending is going to reactivate early rejections,
Right.
losses, and griefs, And then we really need to get to that before we can really get to the process. And then we can start working on the ending as its own process for many patients. And I rarely spend less than 3 months working on an ending.
Okay. What is you can't even say reoffending rate or pathology rate or not falling back down into the hole rate once people have gone through whatever what is right for them number of sessions is with you? I'm thinking about some research from the University of Bournemouth, which I think it was the horse course. They did into the horse course in the UK, who are interesting people, and we've got to have them on the show, where they had looked at domestic violence intervention with horses, and had found that there was still a 50% decrease in the violence a year after the equine intervention had finished, which was an astonishing,
Yeah.
So for you, what do you
Amazing.
data on that as well? Like, what's the after effects once people have gone through their Lundehagen?
I don't have data on that, but my clinical experience is that the what would you call it? The patients that decide for themselves for how long they want and who can be a part of making the treatment plan and endings, they rarely come back.
Do you get do you have any way, has there been follow-up, even if it's unofficial, where you kind of keep a bit of tabs on people just to
Yeah, well, they can
how they're doing?
recontact me.
Say that again.
They can recontact me.
Okay.
So we have the agreement that, within so and so long, you can recontact me and you can always be referred.
Okay, so they always have the idea that the door is open.
Yeah. While patients that have a limited amount of time, either because they're governmentally funded or if they're from an institution, I'd say that the relapse rate there is, I don't know, pretty high.
What's the, I mean, that's very honest to admit. What is the solution for that? If okay, these people are coming for this very set, perhaps rather minimal period of time with me, you yourself, just because of your own emotion, must find that saddening to think, they're very likely to relapse. The rates could be quite high. In your view, what's the best way to mitigate that, minimize that, and how do you deal with that?
But I'm really, strongly thinking that I'm not going to be able to fix things in 6 times. I mean, that's not the world. But I find it really meaningful, and I find that many of the clients that come here, even for just 6 times, even if they relapse or even if things becomes difficult, then making these 6 times the most useful and the most meaningful possible. And we all agree, if you have some sort of severe issue, then 6 sessions is not going to change a lifetime of things. So we all agree on that when we start, and we talk about that. And we talk about the ambivalence of, life, and we talk about the difficulties, and we talk about sort of, if you come in and you're a substance use disorder patient with, huge trauma, problems, criminal background, and you're like, I just want a family and a job. That's really cool. It might take some time, So we just talk about what's real, what's reality going on, and I think it's
Yes.
really important to be, to be reasonable and to be sensible. I'm no magician. I'm just here to be a part
Well,
of.
I think what you're putting your finger on is that you are a good chapter in somebody's life story,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And
yeah,
that if that chapter can then inform further good chapters,
yeah.
it's a good thing. 'Cause I often struggle with this with the horseboy work and movement method work. There are some families who we worked with for years and we saw amazing outcomes. Even
Mm,
short times, we saw amazing outcomes, and other families who went away and then perhaps fell into some really difficult situations,
mm,
and then your heart really went out to them and thought, well, but then some. Now I've sort of been in the game for upwards of 20 years. I've seen some of those families then recover and interestingly use the resilience that they
mm,
learned while they were helped to learn while they were with us, kick in. And I've even had some people come back and say, hey, look, it was actually those times at Horseboy or those times,
mm,
at another Horseboy place, might not even been ours, that
mm,
so when I did fall back in that hole, I had more tools. So I think the reason I ask that question is I think a lot of people, when they're getting into this world of equine assisted stuff, it can be daunting when you realize that despite the miracles horses bring, those miracles might be in the moment, but they might or might not carry over. But at the same time, then there's a secondary set of miracles that can happen, where there's almost like a
mhm,
gestation period or a myelination period, where those
mm,
resilience tools that the horses gave
mm,
then can sort of resurface at a later date. And I think that's perhaps something that's not talked about. We
mm,
tend to think in terms of 6-month follow-ups or a year follow-up. And that actually brings me a bit more to your personal story, because you yourself have told me a little bit about how you got into this in the first place. None of us, or very few of us, I think, get into this kind of work because we wake up at 6 years old going, I want to be an equine psychotherapist, or me, I want to run do this horseboy thing. And no, it's not like that at all. I, as everyone knows, fell into it because of my son, and stumbled into something that worked, and then sort of kept doing it because why would you not? But I think most of us have a personal reason why, and we also know that we are ourselves the metaphors of the ups and downs of life, and the consistency of horses in our lives and nature in our lives is what keeps us thriving, not just surviving. Talk
mm.
to us about you. What brought you to Lundehagen? Take us back to your girlhood. You've told me stories of being up in the mountain with your horse, really in the wilds as a young girl. Why? What took you there? What were you looking for?
Well, I could talk about that. I was always curious about nature and I loved being with animals. I was crazy about horses from age of 2, and I came from absolutely no horse family. And I grew up with a single mom, and she had she had her own struggles, and she was working a lot, and we were moving a lot. And somehow I found it really hard to sort of fit in, adjust to my family and to whatever place I was moving here and there and hoping to find something, and also with extreme amount of energy. And just the other day, I was added on Facebook, this new thing on the internet, by a woman who lived in the same city as me when I was like maybe 13 or 14. And all of these memories came back because she's grown up to be this beautiful, very nice, she's a politician or advisor for politics or something. And I looked at the pictures of her and her friends, and I realized that, I knew those girls. I knew them when I was, 13, 14, 12, 15, whatever. And I knew some really nice people at that time. And then I remember that once I was out riding, I had an Icelandic horse at that time, and we were roaming everywhere. up in the mountains, out in the fields. And I was out riding, and I met one of the guys in that group of people. And I was talking to him, and he was really nice. He was just being, normal, polite. Hi, how are you doing? Oh, nice horse, whatever. And I remember a distinct feeling of, I can't do this. I have to get away. And so I said bye-bye, and I took my horse and I rode. And I think it was not very long after that I moved away from home. And I knew a lot of people in that area, and they were quite nice, quite nice group of people. But there was something inside of me. It was not them, but it was something inside of me that was really upset. And of course, throughout my life, I've been working a lot with what's going on in my life. And I know that, this turbulent childhood of my mom and dad splitting up, and my mom having a lot of work and having a lot of her own struggles, very complicated relationship, and my dad not being present at all. And somehow inside of me, that made some very strong feeling of not belonging anywhere, I think. But the stables, I always belonged in the stables. Wherever I could find a horse, I would feel that I belonged somewhere. And what I know from, theory of attachment is that it's when you feel belonged and understood that you start to develop the capacity to mentalize, understand what's going on inside of other people. And you start to develop the capacity for empathy. So I think that, my attraction to the horses and to the stables became my sort of safe place. And also, going back to the psychotherapy literature and listening to Bjorn or Winnicott and listening about the holding environment and the ability to be understood and tolerated. I think that, me growing up I think I was maybe 10 years old when I started living in the stable. And I literally grew up in the stable, and when I was 17, I moved to Iceland to work with wild horses. And then I came back to Norway and I imported 24 horses from Iceland on an airplane. And that went completely crazy on the airport in Norway. So they never, ever imported horses by plane to Norway after that. So horses became sort of a part of my family and my safe place and my companion in life. And yeah, that's the place where I turn to when I'm stressed, when there are things going on in life which is too difficult to deal with. Then I just go there and I'm lost with my animals for a while.
Okay. Your mum was not horsey, single mum, overwhelmed with work, her own difficulties, dad not there. So, okay, you find your way to stables, but how did you end up owning a horse? That's a more difficult thing, and that takes a little bit of, obviously, financial stuff. How did you manage to put that together?
Well, I do think that my mom, being overwhelmed with life, I think she had some sensible instincts. I think she realized that, if I were just in a stable, I would be relatively safe and she could go off to work or whatever she needed to do. So when I was 10 or something, she managed to buy a small pony. It cost 500 euros, I think, or less. And I would pay quite a lot for the boarding of that pony, and it was completely crazy. Oh, I don't think I could ride him very much because he would just run, but we had a lot of fun nevertheless, and we built, obstacle courses in the forest, and I lived there with him. And after a while, I managed to sell him and buy this Icelandic horse. And I started working at an early age so that I could feed them and care for them. And then...
You've talked about disappearing off into the mountains.
Yeah.
A little bit with you in the mountains behind your house at Lundehagen. It gets pretty wild pretty quick. So Norway, we know it's a bit like Canada. You get out of a certain line of the farmland and poof, it's just forest and mountain and lakes. What did you find out there in that nature? And how was going in there on a horse more healing than just going in on foot?
Well, It's kind of interesting, in this a little bit unsettled life, getting into nature and this solid, concrete, living environment felt very meaningful, and my restlessness could sort of, be useful. So I managed to get a dog when I was 13. And then I had this Icelandic horse. And I think I was 14 the first time I brought him into the wilderness, and I slept under the stars, just exploring with those two. And those were my pack, We were the herd out there. And as he would be, the Icelandic pony would be even more loyal than the dog. She was a German Shepherd, Norwegian moose dog mix. So if she was hunting, then she would be off for a couple of weeks and then she came back. But the pony, he would come. So whenever there was this area which was a little bit difficult to rocky or something, then I would let him loose and I will go first and I would call him, and then he would find his way over the wetlands or the stony areas. And that was, what did I find? I think, well, that's really hard to say, but somehow I found myself, I was there with my little herd, and that was, a place in the world where I belonged.
Well, when I picture that, and I picture this younger Norunn out there in this beautiful wilderness with this loyal pony and this selectively loyal dog, the word that springs to mind is joy. The joyful picture. And, to be out there, there's the moose, there's the deer, there's the bears, and there's the trees themselves, there's the berries, there's the birds, there's the insects, there's the, it's nature. Exploring joyfully, as you said, that was a very nice thing that you said, that was where my restlessness was useful. And feeling useful, of course, is feeling purpose is fundamental to feeling joyful. And we talked about what can psychotherapy do if it's alleviating suffering. And it's funny you said that as I was making a note saying, how does this alleviate suffering? And then he immediately started talking about alleviating suffering. I can absolutely see the joy, having also experienced it myself, of disappearing into the wilderness, into nature with your horse. And although I've done it on foot and I've done it in canoes and I've done it in many other ways, and I absolutely endorse them all as agents of joy, I think for those of us who are horse people, it is never more joyful than when we're with our horse and connecting with our horse in that way. When, let's say I'm a patient though, and I'm coming to you, and despite the fact that Lundehagen is in this beautiful setting, we're standing in an indoor arena, or we're, looking out into the field. We're not out there in the wilderness. The alleviating suffering, here's my question, where's the joy?
I'd say that when I bring clients to my horses, whether it's into the herd or the horses into the indoor arena, and people get to interact with them, get to know them, explore the contact, I think what most frequently comes up is joy. And this spontaneity that we allow for and encourage, and this individual exploring. We do quite a lot of work at Liberty, in relational work, exploring things together with the horse, but we also do some basic teaching that many clients find comforting, but the teaching will always allow for individual exploring and different solutions. It's not you have to keep your horse on the right side holding this hand like that. It's more, we need to have this communication going where you can sort of, convey to the horse that you need to move now and we're going to move in this direction. And then how do we figure out a language between the two of you, And to see some of the clients dancing around with the horses, it's just amazing. So we always say that, when you lead the horse from the stable or from the fields into the indoor arena, then remember that this horse is attached to you now, through the rope. So you need to be really careful where you put that horse. because it's going to be uncomfortable for that horse. You cannot move away if there's a situation or another horse close to it. And it's fantastic how people immediately understand that. Okay, he's attached to me. It's not they're leading the horse, but the horse is attached to you. And they become so responsible so quickly. And the other day we had a group, and one of the guys in the group, he was completely chaotic. He's going to be in court after the therapy session. Up and down, hysteric. And we were thinking, oh my God, okay, so yeah, well, go pick a horse. And he would find the horse. And before we could talk to him, he had put the halter on and turned the horse around and started walking in one direction. And the horse stepped on him. Of course, I mean, that happens when you're completely chaotic around a horse. There can easily be a human foot under a horse foot. But he was like shocked, oh my God, of the pain and realization that something is going on here and have to interact with this animal. And he didn't talk too much about that. But then he went into the indoor arena and he started doing some of the exercises that we have been practicing, how to communicate with this horse. And after a while, he definitely didn't do anything that I suggested. He just did it completely his way. But him and the horse, they found something that they were doing, and they were completely in their own bubble. And then after a while, this horse had never participated in that kind of therapy before. So it was a little bit interesting to see how she would react to being a part of that therapy. And after a while, he would just take off the leash, the halter and everything, while the others were still doing their things. And then he would just lead his forehead onto the forehead of the horse. And they were standing completely silent together. And it was a very special moment for me because I was so happy that the horse was allowed to participate in a therapy session like this, and really communicating with this animal. But the joy on his face after that session, that was just, he was completely calm in his face and his body. And he was so filled with, this was fantastic. This was so much fun. We could communicate. We were there together. And he had no idea that the rest of the group were doing something completely different, But the joy of this was extreme. And in my interviews of the young people, what comes out the most is joy. It was so cool, We could bring the horses along that road, or we could walk through the obstacle course, or, it was so cool. We could talk to each other and communicate about which horses we wanted to include, and we could be together in what we're doing.
And we're taking a few notes. It seems that what you've been highlighting is specific components of joy, which I would like to just go over for the benefit of the listeners. And I want to, Norunn, I'd like you to give your 2 cents on whether you agree with this. So I'll pose a question. Is joy a component, a sort of composite of a certain number of components? Because we talk about a difference between, we have the word happiness and we have the word joy, and they're to some degree interchangeable, but they're also different words. And I think they carry a slightly different thing. I think we think of happiness perhaps as a lower state and joy is a higher state somehow. So go back to you in the mountains. I was picturing you in the nature, and I was picturing the components of the nature, the trees, the animals, the birds, the insects, the flowers, and the picture of you and the horse and the dog. But you said they were my pack. That led me to make a little note here of a question, which is belonging. And is belonging joy? And because with belonging, okay, I also wrote dancing with horses joy. They're attached to their horse and they're dancing with horses. And how can that not make one joyful, you'd think? But is belonging joy? And then with belonging comes, of course, responsibility. You said you're attached to that horse and how quickly they figure a sense of responsibility. And of course, what's responsibility but purpose? And a sort of mixture often of purpose and achievement. So are necessary components for joy a sort of a happy experience. So let's say that's being in nature with the horse or dancing with the horse attached to the horse. But then this feeling of my pack and this horse, or I and this herd of horses, I belong. And now with that belonging comes a responsibility, purpose, and achievement, and that elevates happiness to joy. Is something like that going on?
I think you put so many important components into the words. I think the word that we need to include is love.
Love. Speak to me of love.
Well, when we talk about, I think love and empathy needs to be important part of a good relationship and also a good therapeutic relationship.
Someone might say, well, okay, these people come through the door. They don't live with you. They're not part of your family. And they're coming in a professional capacity. So how does love come into this? Can you tell us that?
Well, I think many of my clients, they say when they have met the horses once or twice, they say that it's so crazy, you know, I feel so filled with love when I leave from here. And I think that in talk therapy, what I aim at, I mean, it's really important to work with people that you also feel a certain match with, because I need to care for my patients. I need to really be tuned into and to, you know, activate my empathy and my mentalization skills and my ability to tune into their suffering without judgment, without becoming, you know, some sort of condemning figure.
Yeah.
And I think that's a major part of love. And I do think that somehow people, when they meet the horses and they can feel them physically, oxytocin, you know, social bonding relations being responded to, they quite easily feel connected to love and relationship and understanding and care. And I think that's a huge component, and it's very empowering, you know?
Yeah. You know, we were talking perhaps 30 minutes ago about, well, if someone is, what is it about the presence of horses? Is it their physical beauty? What is it? But I think you've hit on something there where I think all beings embody love, because love is actually what the universe is composed of. At least I believe that. I think, though, that horses embody it in a way that speaks to the human in a very particular way. Because you say, well, why not a dog? Dogs are full of love. You know, they offer us love. That's why we keep, you know, that's why we have them, really, these days. It seems, though, that horses, that they have this thing where they stand apart from us. As you said, the dog comes, wants to please. And actually, we know horses kind of want to please as well, but it's not as obvious. So perhaps it's this feeling of being accepted and therefore perhaps loved by something that's independent of one, and beautiful and iconic. Horses are beautiful and iconic. So it's almost like being accepted and loved by the best looking person in the room, sort of thing. It's so glamorous and is so interesting and and wow, they've accepted me, little old me, you know. Gosh, that makes me feel joyful and that makes me feel loved. And whether or not that's actually going to his brain or not doesn't matter in terms of the effect that it has on the human.
And not only that they feel love, but by feeling understood and accepted, they feel love for the other. And I think that's the most healing part.
So that brings us, of course, to the horse themselves. For a horse to offer well-being, a horse must have well-being. For a human to offer well-being to another human or to a horse, the human must have well-being, self-care, welfare. One of the things I've noticed when I've come to Lundehagen is the horses look fabulous. What do I mean by that? They've got top lines. They're muscled. They are supple. Their coats are shining. They're happy when they interact with each other. I'm working with a hospital in a country I won't disclose and they have a small equine program too. It's a mental hospital, and they know they need to change, but they're having trouble figuring out how, and we're trying to help them with that. And horses do not have any well-being. They're sad looking and sad acting. Yours are not. They look physically fabulous. Like I say, they're muscle, they're real athletes. They come into the presence like, hey, yeah, what's shaking? What do you do? How do you, for those people who are out there running programs, I think everyone would like to have horses that look and act like that. So what's the Lundehagen way? Tell us your program for your horse welfare and well-being.
Well, that's extraordinarily kind of you to say, and makes me very happy that you say that. Well, for psychotherapeutic reasons, when I include horses into therapy, I think it's really a good idea to include horses because they're horses, and to be really clear about why we would like to include horses instead of, dogs or camels or wheelbarrows or, instruments or something, which I think can be fantastic, all of them. And for me, the relational kind of work that I do in psychotherapy, you have the behavioral kind of work and the cognitive therapies and the interventional kind of therapies. And then you have more of the relational kind of work that we've been talking about, what's going on inside of me when I'm together with you, and how do we work with the empathy and the mentalization capacity and development of functional strategies to get what you need in life. But we also have sort of the conflict level. So what's going on inside of you? What kind of self-defeating sort of systems and programs and stuff and whatever are you doing? And I'm in both of those. I work in the relational, field, and I work in the conflict field. And when considering relational work, it's super important that we include the horses into the relational work as well. If I'm not treating my horses as a sentient being, how am I going to expect my client to learn about relational, real work of what's going on? Which means, number one, I need to know my horses. I need to have people on the team who really knows horses and can really be open-minded, like we talk about, having the knowledge to be really curious, being humble enough to say that we might be wrong. We're exploring this. And we need to sort of accept that something is going on here and we don't always know what's going on. And we need to understand that each horse is an individual on its own with its own needs, history, background, personality, and so on. But to strive for the most knowledge available about horses and our horses is essential for good psychotherapy. Because when we're observing horses and people are, all kind of projections, metaphors, thinking about what's going on there in a group, one person can say, look, the horses, they hate us. They don't want to have anything to do with us. And another person will say, oh, all of those horses are so cute. They really want to hang out with us. One person will say that horse is really, very narcissistic and disgusting, and he has so many opinions about things. And another person will say, oh, look at that horse. I think maybe he has, pain somewhere. So we immediately get so much metaphors and so much projections and so much thinkings about what they see, which will immediately inform us about how do they sort of operate in the world, and how can I understand the way you approach other living beings, But if I don't have the capacity to, in my head, at the same time be a part of what they're experiencing, and silently also be able to observe the horses for, what's going on out there, then I think we are prone to go into the enactment of the pathological structure of our clients. So to provide the best practice possible, good horse knowledge is essential in my world when you work in a relational kind of setting, and that's sort of the main goal for the interaction and the structure. And when we work in that world, then each horse becomes really important, and each horse physical needs. So I think that, for some of our horses that are actually able to go back to back in sessions for 6 hours in a day, it's amazing. It's quite demanding, but some of them are really able to do that. Then I need to provide them with a surrounding and a life that makes them able to do that, because they're my best colleagues, And then some of our horses, they can do 1, maybe 2 sessions a week. If not, they're gonna check out. So we encourage our horses to say no. We encourage our horses to opt out. And our clients, they love that. When they come and they choose 3 horses and one of the horses says, not today, no thank you. And we say, no thank you today. Let's take another one. And they're like, it's so fantastic to see. He can say no. Oh my God, maybe I can say no too. That's wonderful. So that's a huge, major part of how we interact with our horses. But then it's hard to do all these sessions back to back. So they need to have physical strength as well. And I've learned a lot from you, Rupert, of course, and I'm really inspired by your thinking of the physical needs of the horses. We've always been sort of concerned with physical needs of the horses, that they need to be, at a medium level of physical strength, and that their body needs to be sort of okay arranged. But we have placed even more emphasis on that the last few years, and also the way of working with them, that we're always considering, what do they think about this? How can we show them? And what we see is, of course, that whenever we give the horses choice and we show them what we want, then they have a tendency to say, yes, I'll do that.
Do you talk us through the basic weekly program for mental and physical well-being that you have for your horses? Because you've got a variety of different horses. You've got everything from fancy-ish warm bloods there to, good working fjords and Icelandic ponies and minis, and you got all sorts there, and different types, different needs, and you've got some really happy old seniors who are still feeling pretty good in themselves. So, but there's a common denominator in how you're approaching how they're living and what they're doing and how they're worked out physically and how they're worked out mentally. Talk us through the living conditions and talk us through the physical workouts that they do.
So all of our horses live in herds, and our herds are now divided on the basis of, their needs, nutritional needs. We have some horses, fjords, they don't need food.
They rocks, it's true, yeah. And
then we have some warm bloods and some ponies that needs, unlimited amount of food. So right now they're divided into 2 herds of needing food, not needing food. And then they live outdoors in as big as possible areas. Maybe it could be bigger always, but we try to give them a variety of areas to explore. And they have good sleeping areas and of course, hot water in the winter. And then all of them are trained physically, either on a treadmill or in groundwork dressage or out in the forest at least 3 times a week.
when you say treadmill, you mean a water treadmill, like a...
Yes. We have a rehabilitation facility for horses on our farm. So there's a separate program, another person leading that program.
horse rehab.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So
they're
those
on...
are our horses that needs to have some
You
more.
mentioned groundwork. What kind of... and dressage? What kind of groundwork and dressage are they doing?
Well, we start off with all of our horses doing a basic of relational-based natural horsemanship groundwork so that they learn, the basic yields, the basic pressure and release, and they learn sort of basic manners that we really need horses to know. So skills, basic skills that they need to know, and basic skills of how to be mounted and to some basic desensitization or how to deal with stress and stuff.
Yeah.
And then we proceed to do basic groundwork from the classical dressage, very much inspired by you. From before, I've done quite a lot of basic groundwork from classical or academic dressage, but we sort of upped that work a little bit to make it a little bit more efficient when it comes to building muscles and body structure, really. Because the work that I've done mostly before is fantastic for building relaxation and suppleness. But I think incorporating a little bit more of the active groundwork can help our horses build even more muscles. And then, so they do that for about 3 times a week. Some of the horses, they do jumping without a rider, so some sort of free jumping, a couple of times a week, especially during the winters. In the summers, they tend to just want to sleep when they come into the shadow in the indoor arena. And then all of our horses participate in some sort of ridden lessons or instructions. And so we also have a kids riding school on Thursdays where we do lessons with kids where they learn to interact with the horses in a more relational way, and they communicate with the horses with their energy and asking them things in a very nice way. And kids love it. They think it's fantastic when they can start to stop a horse without pulling the reins and so on. They have a lot of fun doing cool things, and they do some trails, and we do some working equitation or mounted games things so that they get, accustomed to a lot of things going on them, around them, and with them, and with different kind of populations.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned what you're talking about here is like a full variety of work. And I think that this is something which is often neglected. All of us often over-specialize in many areas of our lives. And I think that we can end up projecting that onto our horses. And we know that we actually like variety in our lives and senses of purpose. But we often say, well, I'm a this kind of rider, or I'm a that kind of groundwork. And then you just sort of endlessly do that same thing with the horse and they get bored. What I like about what you're saying there is that variety. They get to live in herds. Okay, great. They get to live outside. Great. And we also know that's not available to everybody. So I don't want people to feel bad if they have to keep their horses in a public stable in boxes or what. Then it's about making it as good as we can. But definitely herd structures and living outside is you have that down. And you talked about the free jumping as well as the classical work. And with that, of course, one observes a lot of joy. Horses basically having a laugh, running around, what we call crazy time. I think that's so often neglected. And again, the trail riding as part of that, outside exploring, brain building, puzzle solving, going over different types of ground and just being out there in the environment that the organism is designed to be in. But I've observed the way in which you bring that into working with the clients at the same time. And I think that's the key. I think so many programs end up in a stressful time conflict. How am I going to find time to condition my horses? And I see what you've done at Lundehagen is you've really figured out how to integrate the conditioning of the horse into the sessions with the clients. So the horses are getting their needs met at the same time, which takes that time conflict out. I know that you have to leave quite soon. And I think a lot of people would like to learn from Lundehagen. By the way, the leaving quite soon is that she can go off and be with her research advisor for the PhD that will soon be coming out of Lundehagen. So that's great. So I don't want to keep you too much. How do people contact you? And can they come to Lundehagen and learn all this stuff? And I also know that you, every couple of years, you do like a congress, like a conference there overlooking the lake with different horse people coming in from all over the world. Can you tell how do people contact you? How do they come and learn from you? What do they need to know?
So we have a homepage called lundehagen.no, and you are more than welcome to contact me anytime. The email is post@lundehagen.no. Just ask me if there's any questions.
Yeah, the question is, you just said that and it sounded like Norwegian. So
it's Norwegian.
It's the website and the email in dumbed down English for people like me what talk London in it.
So the webpage is Lundehagen.
Lundehagen. Lundehagen.no. .no.
Yes.
Okay.
And the mail is post, P-O-S-T,
Mhm.
at Lundehagen.no.
Okay. Post
So
that.
contact me anytime. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Go ahead. So this conference and coming for courses and learning?
yes, we do offer courses. We have a fundamentals for including horses into services, and then we have the horse in therapy certification for the horse expert or the person on the horse, which is dealing with the horses, which is a 3-level model together with ethologist Emily Kielsen. And then we also offer the HEAL, both the workshop, 3-day workshop, and the education. And next year we'll be coming up with the Lundehagen protocol for interventions with the horses in psychotherapy. And in last year, 2023, we did the seminar on psychotherapy with horses and ethology of the horse. And in 2026, we will do the next seminar where we're doing the attachment and personality structure from the horse perspective and from human perspective. So, welcome.
Lots to come and learn. And for listeners, don't be worried that it's in a foreign country. For some reason, Scandinavian people all learn to be bilingual really, really early, putting us to shame. We are lazy English speakers. But what it means is if you're an English speaker and you go up there, everyone teaching you will be fully bilingual. So you can...
It's going to be really hard to learn Norwegian because everybody is going to want to talk English.
Yeah. And they speak English better than we do. So actually I can go to Norway and learn English, which is great. But it's worth going up there. The approach, I think, is somewhat revolutionary. I think a lot of us down here have a lot to learn. So I'm encouraging you listeners to look into flights to Oslo, because Lundehagen is not only just a beautiful place to hang out and find love and belonging, but it's also a place to learn everything from classical stuff to natural horsemanship to psychotherapy to the lot.
And we hope to have you here soon as well, Rupert.
Well, I'll use any excuse to come back. It's magical there. But thank you for creating magic for people with horses. Thank you for explaining to us psychotherapy and equine psychotherapy. Thank you for giving us insights into what creates joy. Thank you for sharing your story. And, I hope to have you on again. Maybe we could go into some more depth about some of the issues that we could only touch on this time. Thank you.
I'd love to. Thank you so very much, Rupert.
Okay.
So very much for creating this.
All right. So run off and do your research. And
I will. And give my love to your family.
I will. And tell your research supervisor, Charlotte, greetings from me, because she's also another genius.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Join our website, newtrailslearning.com, to check out our online courses and live workshops in Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Athena. These evidence-based programs have helped children, veterans, and people dealing with trauma around the world. We also offer a horse training program and self-care program for riders on longridehome.com. These include easy-to-do online courses and tutorials that bring you and your horse joy. For an overview of all shows and programs, go to rupertisaacson.com. See you on the next show. And please remember to press subscribe and share.